presentation is about nothing about us without us. It's just a reflection being a refugee when I am and I was involved starting in the global domain of refugees. But before starting that, I will request you what you feel, what kind of images come to your mind. Just take few seconds and think about those images when you hear word refugees. And I would like to request you to keep those images in your mind. And I can bet you these images must be not beyond these kind of images. People who are vulnerable, looking for the help, who are desperate to be rescued, and these especially women and children. These are the images I would request you all to keep these images in your head when I'm going to share about my experience about Global Compact of Refugee. So before going into my understanding of Global Compact of Refugee, I just want to clarify as a disclaimer what I am defining, what I learned through my engagement about Global Compact of Refugees, or about this discussion on a global level or regional level, how this discussion has been going so far. So I'm not claiming this is my research or something, but it's a mix of so many discussion where I have been involved. So overall, a global refugee regime, no doubt, there are so many discussion is going on about refugee definition, the impact of a post-war world, and even the response. There are so many collective action and the feeling of how states taking interest in the cooperation, rescue this, and this is not a new topic, but this global regime is having influence of convention and the institution of UNHCR, and there's so many other decision-making mechanisms which been discussed and will be continue to discussion. So, but this it gives an impact how globally in the states and the institutions are talking about how we can solve, because refugee is a crisis, but we are making them more crisis. And even different recently past few years, it shows the witness a huge importance to talk about refugees as a solution, how there's a huge increase of number of refugees, especially forced displaced people worldwide because of conflict, because of other part of international came together and think about how we can solve this issue. And there's a main component which started in a New York Declaration of Refugee and Migrant in 2016. And from the name, you can say it happened in New York, and they discuss about how we can solve it. And then they come up with a comprehensive refugee response framework. And this all two discussion give them, we really need to come up with new approach. And they propose a global compact of refugee and global compact of migrants. But here in this, my sharing presentation, I will focus on global compact of refugees and how being a refugee we involve then, and later on my experience of global refugee forum, because global compact of refugee is a framework, and how we can check we are doing the implementation or not. So then they think about global refugee forum, which is again a milestone, a point to meet all the stakeholders involved about how we can respond to this refugee worldwide crisis, and how we can share our responsibility. So as I mentioned before, this is a global compact of refugees is one kind of a milestone which is happened with so many past years discussion. And this discussion, they name it consultation, and they are point where regional and global, especially actors and states, they come together in New York Declaration, and they came together and involve multi-stakeholder, which they call NGO consultation, which has happened. And then they keep talking about it and stop taking. In 2018 was on one point when again they ask different actors what they're thinking about how we should discuss. And this consultation is is kind of method where they generate the reflection, what's been missing, how they can indicator with the solution, which could be a problem, which could be a more innovative approach to solve this ongoing crisis started in 2015. So then they come up for the Global Compact of Refugee, and later on in 2019 we had our first refugee forum, which happened in Geneva. So this Global Compact, as I said, is one kind of a framework where they really give up idea as a blueprint, where bring solution, a sustainable solution for the situation which is facing by refugees, but more states are worried about how we can respond them, because there's a huge burden on them, and how states are feeling. And this Global Compact as a framework, as a blueprint, as an idea, as a motivation, they come with different kind of indicators how we can solve that. And this objective of the Global Compact, they divided in a more four component. One, how we can ease pressure on host countries, because when this crisis started, host countries are the main one who has the share this burden on them. So that's they realize how we can release this pressure on the host countries and come up with a multiple solution according to their region. And more second was enhance refugee self-reliance. So how we can make sure refugees has rights, their human rights, how they can get more education, how they can more sustainability in their situation, and also how we can expand a solution of as a third country solution. And there's fourth one, support to condition in countries of region for return safety and dignity. Like if few refugees community want to return, like it started and happening even in Afghanistan, and how we can make sure their condition return to their own countries is safe and they can go with dignity and sustainable environment. So this was the main component of GRC. And Global Refugee Forum, which happened in 16 and 17 and in 18 of December in 2019, it was a main point where they invited more than 3,000 multi-stakeholder to think about how they are implementing this Global Compact of Refugee in their context. And this was a huge, big event. So for historical event, when they only talk about refugees solution upon guided by a Global Compact of Refugee. And here in this point, they really want to create, develop, and strengthen the architecture and arrangement, what need to be done to create a long-term impact, and how they can translate this principle, which is designed by Global Compact of Refugee, but how we create more solidarity and more understanding what does it mean in the paper, in the documents, and they can discuss. And also they really want to focus the support mechanism to arrange and contribute this burden and sharing responsibilities, again through discussion, holding different kind of themes, thematic areas, was really burden and responsibility share, how we can feel what is burden. And again, why I'm emphasize of the burden is about refugees. They feel like how refugees been neglected, and how we can increase about their human rights, how we can create an enabling environment to facilitate them in their jobs and livelihood in where they are living, and how can facilitate solution. So this was the main area of GRF. And then they really want to engage multi-stakeholder, like private sector. First ever, they really invited private sector as well in GRF, where they invited them. They invited researchers, they invited universities, they invited multi-stakeholders like cities, how they are doing. And this was the first ever moment which they come up with to create a pledge, to submit a pledge. So a pledge could be around in these few indicators, which is 10, but it was becoming more kind of a new model where people feel okay, this is our responsibility, so we are pledging for the good health, we are pledging for the good education, we are pledging how we can contribute to the good initiative, and they're pledging how we can contribute to the livelihoods. And states came together, institution came together, INGO came together, governments came together to pledge like how they can give in more funding to make this GCR framework into the reality. So this was one main important element of this GRF. So this pledge and contribution become a main advocacy point, because this is guided by a global compact of refugees objective, and they really highlighted where we really need the support from each other, and how we can create and continuously commitment, and we can prevent about future conflict, how we can talk about the protection, how we can talk about response and solution, and what's need to be done in a technical assistance, resettlement process. And there are so many themes they discuss about national, regional, global level, and all the relevant stakeholders were invited to create a joint pledge, kind of a movement, so they all can work towards a goal to share burden of the refugee crisis, which is upon on the global edge as a main concern. So then these constitutions started, and there was a consultation again happening in a background when they were involving creating short-term and long-term objective, how we can talk about this GRF and GCR. And this consultation keep continue and coming up with the multiple stakeholder talk about upon their experience, about their expertise, how we can create more livelihood, integration, resettlement plan. And this consultation is still happening right now, which is led by multinational companies, led by international INGO, led by UNHCR, led by ECWA, and so many high-level discussion are happening, who are bringing this consultation as a multi-stakeholder point, how we can create more sustainable solution and reflection of what has been done and what we need to be done and where we are standing right now. So as I mentioned, this track of pledges are happening, and if you are interested, you can go to UNHCR website and you can see how they make a digital platform where you can track these pledges, who is contributing. And again, last year, we also have a high-level official meeting, stock-taking meeting, where we talk about what happened and what couldn't deliver because of pandemic, and the future of upcoming second Global Refugee Forum. So I will now go back to you when I started my presentation about telling you what is Global Compact of Refugee and what is Global Refugee Forum. So you must be thinking about those images and bring those images back, because that's what we as a refugee felt. Like, we are refugees, we have nothing to offer, we are vulnerable, and we need to be helped, which is no doubt not wrong, but it's not truly 100% correct. Because so far this discussion just takes you as a beneficiary. Everyone is talking about refugees, but they are not talking with refugees, and how refugee can be center of this discussion is become more difficult and sometimes problematic. And these images, this narrative, when they just think about you are the one they need to save. It's similar, like if I give you an example, like you want to admit your child in a school, and everyone knows around your neighbors, and your city is asking about your child to your neighbor, like which kind of school your neighbors should go. And this is happening how via this transformation are happening. And that's what we felt as a refugee. Like, we really identify, this is a space where everyone is talking about refugees, and 2015 and 16 crisis really give to motivate refugee leaders who were in that specific invited domain. They really said, okay, this is our place to keep continue what we're advocating. And there are so many partner like INGO who really promote refugee leader like us to unpack this whole of a society approach and how we can engage and keep advocating with refugees. So we as a refugee who were there in that limited spaces, we took it as an opportunity. And we took it as a moment to be engaged and an important role to highlight how we as a refugee feeling about it, and we pledge it. And we said we are there. There were very few in 2016, only one person as a refugee who was there in GC, Global Compact of Refugees discussion in New York. And there later on in our discussion, even entities, agencies, international organization like UNHCR, they start realizing that is it important to involve refugees if we want to create a sustainable and long-term impact. That's why I'm sharing one paragraph from a Global Compact of Refugees, where they really mention we need to involve and include refugees and member from refugee community if we really want to create more sustainable solution to this crisis. It was become really historical moment for us as a refugee advocate, refugee representative, because when we had Global Compact Refugees, we translated this framework into action, and we start being involved in this consultation. And even in December 2019, I will say it's a privilege to be there. I was there, and I was there among my 78 others refugees. But as I said, in December 19, there were more than 3,000 members, delegates, multi-stakeholder, and we were only 2.3% were refugees. So you can imagine everyone was talking about the main discussion, the main holder are refugees, but how limited refugees get access to be there. And we said you can imagine 75 refugees, and they need to be involved in these all frameworks of the GCR and global. And we did contribute to this invited places, and we support our reflection. And this reflection help us, because it's really amazing opportunity where this component make clear we need to share responsibility. We really come up with a solution of refugee response. And it's a very simple thing, Global Compact of Refugee coming up with a new deal for the refugee communities and who are hosting them, and how is it really simple? Yeah, but as a refugee, sometimes we have this question, is it simple as that? Because when we unpack, we talk about our lived experience, but who is holding still expertise is very important when we are sharing our stories, when we are sharing the mechanism we are living in. But still our stories as a lived experience remains as experience, never becomes as expertise. Then we think, what about those knowledges we are sharing? What about those reflection we are sharing through this consultation? Because consultation is about talking about who has these places, and again, who has the power and position to conduct these consultations. This is a very important point I would like to share. As I said, being a refugee leaders coming around, the Global Refugee-led Network was one of the main active component, and we took this approach of consultation, and we had our first ever Global Refugee Summit delivered by refugee leaders coming from around the world. And we invited 20 refugee-led initiative, and we invited more than 80 refugee advocates coming from 72 countries. And it happened in Geneva, first ever, because those actors who were invited in last few years, they felt the need to talk about refugees by themselves. So they had this summit for refugees by refugees. And later on, we continue this consultation to divide it in the regional chapters. So we had then this refugee-led consultation in Asia Pacific, then we have in MENA Summit, then we had in Europe, and then we also had this consultation which feed in to come up with our pledge, a meaningful refugee pledge. I will share more about it later. These all contributions help us why it is important to be involved. It is very difficult to involve in a global led conversation mechanism such as Global Compact of Refugee or GCR, but we are still managing our, we are advocating to be involved using this element of our lived experience of consultation, and we are feeding in. So as I mentioned, it was really a moment for us as a refugee advocate. We participated and we come up with a refugee participation pledge. We also become advisory, all the main working groups where we talk about as a refugee advisor, like a resettlement plan, which is happening in annual tripartite, and also a refugee advisory group with UNHCR, where refugees are advising what kind of structure need to be done, what kind of more mechanism we can have. But the thing is that these all experience to be involved, giving you more insight. We are being there, we are invited there, and how we can feel about this all communities coming from different part, how they've been represented. So I really want to take this moment to define what is meaningful participation for us, because when we are talking about meaningful participation, and representation is about how we can include, how we can make, who has the expertise, as I said, who has the innovation approach, who has the resources to implement these ideas, these consultation to conduct. And also how we can collaborate when we are talking about this mechanism to changing towards a sustainable solution. So this is a reflection from a refugee lens, like they are so far happening about refugee being invited as a representative. Then in 2016, there was a first refugee invited to as a speaker. And then in 2019 and later on, we start talking about the statement, a refugee statement with INGO and the other multi-stakeholder. We started because this was the opportunity we started to give a statement. And then now we are in that moment, we are ensuring what is meaningful participation, and we make sure nothing about us without us. Because these spaces, as I mentioned, these spaces, they are very much somehow felt being closed. They just invite you, and you have a distance relationship in these spaces, and there are few spaces as a global compact of global summit which we conducted. It's a claimed spaces where we refugee feel honor, and we own those spaces. And there's simple spaces, open spaces, such as like today, where we are discussing and reflecting about our engagement in refugee crisis or solution. And this is a picture which I really like about, because this picture really define, it's not, I found it in some document I was going through, and this picture reflects like how we refugee felt, that is closed, where we are not invited, we have any access at all, and how we've been invited to share our story about our journeys, about our experience. And these invited spaces have limited access where we can share, and then we don't have access what have been done later on. And there are claimed spaces where we are inviting other refugees to share their experience, and we feel synergies, and we feel solidarity among ourselves as a refugee coming from different communities. So I will share here, this is an attempt. Again, I said as a refugee, I'm not a researcher or claiming, but I'm just trying to attempt to redefine nothing about us concept, which I myself felt when going through from last few years been engaged on a very high level as a privileged person, as a lucky person to be engaged in this domain, like a high level domain. So this nothing about us is, if I take this and divide them in different component. So I really think nothing means if it's discussion, decision, policy discussion, or it is about anything. So consultation, it has to be involve refugees, us, and we have to be involved. It shouldn't be done without us. So it's regardless, it's a policy, local policy, high level policies, is a discussion, we have to be involved. And later about regardless about what, about either is burden sharing responsibility, is either is self-reliance, or either is a solution. It shouldn't again happens without us. If we are talk about any themes, we have to be involved in those themes, because we are coming as a different part of our journey, have different impact of these themes upon us as a refugee on a journey, people on the move. And this again, when we are talking about refugees, like about who we are having different age, gender, and diversity. We are women, we are children, we are community minors, we are asylum seekers. And we shouldn't ignore this element. This is a part of discussion. We shouldn't compete with refugee crisis among which crisis is better, which refugee community is better. Like if recent incident happened in Afghanistan shows, again, few years ago we are thinking about Syrians, but we totally forgot about Afghanistan. And now again, we are thinking about Afghanistan. So we shouldn't compete and put vulnerability or victimization to among as a competition, who is a refugee and who is not. So this is a really critical moment for us to think about how we refugee felt being put as a competition, who is more victim, who has the set checklist, or you are refugee and you are not refugee, or you are people on the move and you are not. So this is a really crucial to understand how we feel it. Again, as mentioned, being engaged again and again, we felt when this consultation happens, when these events happens, there still we felt, okay, yes, when you are designing, are we involved as a refugees? Are we involved as a main partner? Are we co-designing? But it's remain these spaces where these discussions are happening, where this blueprint being developed, where this consultation are happening. Are they open? Are there claim spaces? This is very important. These spaces are this main component of this whole discussion. Are we discussing? Are we understanding it or not? And if we are not invited, not involved in a high level discussion, how we can think we are part of this discussion? If we are not giving resources to create our own open discussion as a reflection, then how we can generate more energy and component of human rights debate, humanitarian debate. And even this COVID pandemic showed even this digital become new space, digital mechanism become a space and problematic from those regions who does not have the privilege to have this technology. So we need to think about these solutions as well. And these are becoming unfortunately more closed discussion, and how we can come up with a more solution so we can feel claimed this is our, and we can own to become more accountable, but also can implement this discussion into reality. So this is come together when in the end, nothing about us without it means is some kind of a framework, which I felt personally like how we can generate a big framework when we're thinking. It's not a only to be stay as a sensitive person about meaningful participation or involving refugee, but how much we are responding toward this approach, how much we are ready to understanding and to creating transformation. Unfortunately, still we are stuck on the consultation on as an invited person, and we NGOs, INGOs, especially UNHCR, they are trying to think about how they can go beyond consultation. And these all elements is giving more limitations. Sometimes you feel these are not helping and they are not working together, but they are working in different parts. And sometimes one part is there and other part is not there, and it's not functioning together. And that's what we are trying to achieve as a refugee advocate when we are saying, because this is a screenshot from a very recent Global Compact of Indicator reports, which shows again there's a huge refugee crisis gonna come, especially with the climate crisis and the new crisis such as Afghanistan and also Yemen and Venezuela crisis, and they're gonna be happen more. But if in last few years only we helped one refugees in the 100 found in as a durable solution in 2020, then we can realize what we are missing and why we need to change this image to this. This is very important, how we can create more synergy, understanding that we are talking about people, not vulnerable people, but potential persons who can contribute to our upcoming nations, locally, regionally, and global level. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to have more questions from your side.